T9C got the fucking juice.
Silk is the new gold.
Hey, Chris, this shit fire.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. Hope everybody is doing well on this wonderful and eventful Wednesday night. College football by the day is becoming must-see. You got the chaos surrounding the 12-team college football playoffs, and then you already had Deion Sanders taking the Colorado head coaching job around 2 years ago. And fast forward to now, you have Bill Belichick, the greatest head coach arguably in the history of football, an 8-time Super Bowl champion, going from the pro ranks down to the collegiate game. He has accepted the head coaching job for North Carolina football. And I've been dying all day to give you guys my thoughts on this move because, listen, I get it that Bill Belichick, from a personality standpoint, doesn't stand out like a guy who's going to be in the living rooms of recruits, flipping guys, but he definitely has what it takes to succeed at the college level. And with college football, with the implementation of the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, it pretty much is a watered-down version of what the NFL is, which I think gives Bill Belichick a good infrastructure to have success at UNC. But I want to break down why I believe Bill Belichick won't struggle coaching college football. On the NFL side of things, the biggest story in the league right now has been the drama surrounding A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts with the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't more so want to get into that. I more so want to talk about the big picture theme of that, which is why NFL wide receivers are labeled to be divas. There's an interim head coach that the Raiders should have hired a few years ago. Want to take a little bit of some time to revisit the past, why them not hiring this interim head coach kind of held back the franchise. The tables have turned for C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. You remember a few months ago, C.J. Stroud was believed to be a top 5 quarterback after how good his rookie season was, and it looked like Bryce Young was the biggest bust in NFL history. Well, fast forward to now, the tables have severely turned. Bryce Young has outplayed C.J. Stroud over the last month. And I just want to give my thoughts on both of these two quarterbacks as we enter the final 4 games of this season. Listen, if the Falcons don't make it to the playoffs this year, Raheem Morris has to go. The Steelers are overachieving. Meanwhile, the Baltimore Ravens are underachieving. Why is that? We'll take a look at that. And I got some thoughts on the race for the AFC South title, between the Houston Texans and the Indianapolis Colts, with the tough 3-game stretch that the Texans have coming up. There is a possibility that if the Colts win out and the Texans lose 2 out of their last 4, they could end up winning the division and stealing their playoff spot. And I got thoughts on Joe Burrow, how good I think he's going to be going into the NFL draft next year. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to Hurricane Mike. Shout out to wherever you're watching, YouTube, X, Facebook. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content and when we go live. Remember that you can find this episode along with our other ones wherever you get your podcast from. Links down in the description. Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Make sure that you go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. Once again, the links are down in the description down below. All right, so let's dive into it. Bill Belichick has officially accepted the offer to be the head coach of North Carolina football. This is one of the biggest surprises of 2024. I never would have thought the greatest head coach in NFL history, an 8-time Super Bowl champion, would be coaching college football, but it has happened, people. And I don't see Bill Belichick failing as the head coach of UNC, okay? He, from a coaching standpoint, automatically is the best head coach in college football when it comes to X's and O's, schematics, schemes. There's not a single head coach in the nation that is messing with Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick is going to have this Tar Heels defense playing way better than it ever has under Mac Brown. At least with Bill Belichick, you know that you're not going to be giving up 70 points in the game to a school like James Madison. And when it comes to being able to quickly turn around this program, I expect North Carolina to be an instant contender for the ACC championship as soon as next season kicks off, because Bill Belichick, he's going to assemble a really good staff. He's going to be able to get some good pickups out of the transfer portal. And the biggest pushback on this move has been, you know, just how good is Bill Belichick going to be when it comes to acquiring talent, not just out of the portal, but in high school recruiting. I don't see that really being an issue. He already has hired Michael Lombardi to be his general manager. He's going to assemble a good team to do the heavy lifting when it comes to getting guys out of the portal and recruiting for him. And he doesn't really have to dabble too much on that side of things. And plus, with the new era of college football, with the implementation of the transfer portal and the NIL side of things, college football, nobody really wants to admit it, but it's never been closer to the NFL. You know, Bill Belichick was not only a head coach for the Patriots, but he also was a general manager as well. He knows how to evaluate talent. He knows how to properly allocate money, not overspending for certain players. I'm pretty confident that Bill Belichick is going to do a great job coaching this football program. I don't question if he's going to be able to relate to the younger athletes that he's going to be working with, because when you're paying guys, I don't really think it matters how good of a relationship you have with those players. It kind of is beneficial. You know, Bill Belichick is paying these guys to come play for him while he coaches them up and prepares them for the NFL. And that's the biggest selling point that Bill Belichick has when it comes to recruiting guys out of high school and in the portal. He can go up to a guy and say, hey, look, I might not have a national championship like a Kirby Smart or a Dabo Swinney, but what I do have in comparison to them is the fact that I'm an 8-time Super Bowl champion. I've won world championships at the highest level possible. I've been responsible for helping develop two of the greatest football players all time, that being Lawrence Taylor and Tom Timothy Brady. If you are a high school recruit and you truly care about being developed like how most of these guys claim and they're not chasing the bag, how could you turn down Bill Belichick? Bill Belichick is trying to make North Carolina a pipeline to the NFL. If you want to get NFL caliber coaching, you want to be put in an NFL caliber system that's going to help maximize your potential to best improve your chances of getting drafted for the next level, then going to North Carolina and getting coached by Bill Belichick is the best option for you. Now, if you're coaching a bag, or if you're chasing a bag and you don't want to get coached tough, then playing for Bill Belichick isn't for you. And if you can't handle the tough coaching of Bill Belichick, then you don't have what it takes to make it to the National Football League, because every coach in the NFL, to a certain degree, somewhat is like Bill Belichick. And even in college football, you got guys like Kirby Smart, who coaches his players pretty hard. If you're just one of those guys that just wants to be soft and you just can't handle tough coaching, then you don't have what it takes to succeed. You see, soft players are the ones that they want to be coddled. They don't want to get coached. If you want to get coached, you have no problem being coached hard. Bill Belichick is going to hold these young athletes to a high standard, while also helping them develop as young men, because that's what's so great about the game of football. Not only does playing this game help you become a better player, but it also helps you become a better person on and off the field. Bill Belichick is going to teach these young guys accountability, responsibility, and what it takes to be a team. He has assembled some of the greatest teams in NFL history. And when it comes to being able to build a good staff, he has his son on the roster, Steven Belichick, who I'm pretty sure he knows a couple of good candidates to be his offensive coordinator, his defensive coordinator, a good strength and conditioning coach. Bill Belichick is no novice to the college game. Some of y'all don't know this, but his dad coached at Navy for a very long time. And he also spent a little bit of time back in the 50s coaching at North Carolina. So yes, Bill Belichick does have a little bit that he has to learn when it comes to the collegiate game, but it's never been easier to make the transition from the NFL to college football as what it is today, with this pretty much being the NFL 2.0. You can run North Carolina similarly to how you would run an NFL organization. You hire some of the guys to run your front office department, that being the GM. You get a personnel department, guys who go out, scout guys in the portal, scout guys out of high school. Bill Belichick does need to be in recruits' living rooms, pitching them to come play for him. Most of these coaches aren't really doing the recruiting anyway. Most of these coaches have a staff of 7, 8 former players who go out and do the heavy lifting for them. When these recruits commit, they normally commit because of their relationship, not with the head coach, but with the position coach. That's why when position coaches get fired or they leave for better positions, you normally see a lot of guys flip. And even in the portal, when guys transfer, oftentimes they're transferring to a school with the head coach that recruited them out of high school. I had a homie that was coming out of a prep school. He wasn't able to go to the school he committed to initially on National Signing Day because of his GPA being too low. So he went to a prep school. And at the time, the head coach who he initially committed to, had left for a bigger job. But the position coach who he was really cool with ended up taking a job at Illinois. And he promised them, hey, like, if you do what you're supposed to do in JUCO, we're going to have a scholarship offer ready for you. And, he balled out in JUCO. He was like the number 1 or second best prep athlete. And he ended up holding on to his word. He goes to Illinois. He ends up having a pretty good career. He's at Louisville now, but that's kind of how the transfer portal works. It's not always about who's chasing the bag. It's also about who you know. So therefore, if Belichick can hire good position coaches and good coaches that know how to recruit, I don't see him being able to acquire talent being that big of an issue. And some of y'all act like the name Bill Belichick doesn't hold weight. Everybody knows who Bill Belichick is. Let's not act like these high school recruits never watched football before. When they were watching Tom Brady and the peak of the Patriots dynasty, they saw Bill Belichick hoisting that Lombardi trophy. Everybody knows who Bill Belichick is. Bill Belichick right now, besides Deion Sanders and Kirby Smart, is the most recognizable coach in college football. Everybody knows who he is that plays high school football. I don't see how this doesn't end up being a successful tenure with Bill Belichick taking this job at UNC. UNC, he's going to be able to fix what their biggest inefficiency has been these last 3-4 years, which is that they don't know how to play defense. So with Bill Belichick and all of the accolades that he has from the NFL, I think it's pretty easy to see him getting a lot of talent, both in the portal and in recruiting. And the on-field standpoint, nobody should question how good of a coach Bill Belichick is. This isn't the NFL anymore. It's pretty easy to find a good quarterback, to find good receivers. That's the only thing that held back Bill Belichick once he lost Tom Brady, was that he kind of became a little bit incompetent to drafting good skill position guys. Now, with the NIL and the transfer portal, you can just sign and get a bunch of wide receivers out of high school and in the portal, get a few good quarterbacks, and boom, you're good and set to go. You know that North Carolina is going to be good on the line of scrimmage. You know that they're going to be good up front. This is a team that with this hiring, immediately is going to be a contender, not just for the ACC title, but to also make it into the college football playoffs next season, because the ACC is arguably the weakest Power 4 conference in this sport. There's not a single head coach that's messing with Bill Belichick from an X's and O's standpoint in the ACC. You mean to tell me that Bill Belichick wouldn't coach circles around Mario Cristobal, Mike Norvell, even Dabo Swinney? I don't see how this hiring doesn't end up being somewhat successful. I would really be shocked if Bill Belichick struggles coaching in college football, because the difference between the NFL and college football has never been similar. In my opinion, I mean, there really isn't a difference at all. Let's just call it what it is. The NFL is its own thing on Sundays, and college football is the NFL on Saturdays. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to everyone that's watching on YouTube. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content. If you're listening on Facebook and X, drop us a follow, retweet the stream as well. Greatly helps us out a lot. Now let's continue on. So I seen the story the other day come out about A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts having some possible beef due to some questionable comments that he has made about the Eagles' passing game, and his teammate coming out kind of saying that they're not on good terms. And from a big picture standpoint, you know, why are guys like A.J. Brown and some of the best receivers in the NFL divas? And I think the answer is pretty simple why these wide receivers are divas. And that's because they want to make plays. Nobody wants to be out there as a receiver doing cardio, because that's pretty much what you're doing when you're not getting the football. Imagine running 30-yard posts, 40-yard goal routes, and you don't even get a single chance to touch the football until late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter of the game. That can be very frustrating. Receivers aren't out there to block. If you're a running back and you're not getting the football, that's a little bit different because you're not getting tired that fast. But if you're a wide receiver and you're doing all this running to get no action, of course you're going to get frustrated. When I was playing receiver in high school, I knew a bunch of guys, myself included, who used to get irritated when they weren't getting the ball thrown their way. And for a lot of these wide receivers now, it's not more so about them being divas. It's more so about you got guys that are passionate about the game of football and they want to have an impact. And they want to be just as responsible for the wins as they are for the losses in a sense. Everybody wants to make plays. You get paid millions of dollars to play this game at the highest level. Everybody wants to have an impact. So therefore, when you have a guy like A.J. Brown that's a little bit disgruntled about his lack of targets in spite of winning, it's understandable because you want to be a part of it. You want to say, hey, I contributed to the team's success as well. Nobody wants to play receiver and just be out there just running routes just to run routes just to get some cardio in. You want to make plays and you want to have an impact on the wins. A.J. Brown is one of the best receivers in the game. It shouldn't be that hard to get him involved. Call a few bubble screens, call a few slant routes. Like you don't have to just force feed A.J. Brown the ball early just to appease him. But it doesn't take that much to get the brother a little bit into the game, because what you do when you don't get a wide receiver like A.J. Brown involved is that the more the game presses on, and the lack of targets he continues to receive, he kind of starts to disassociate himself from the game. He kind of gets a little bit out of it. You know, he doesn't have the same intensity when it comes to run blocking. He isn't running routes with the same passion as what he was earlier, because he pretty much is saying, hey, if they're not going to throw me the football, you know, the hell am I out here doing this for? That's mentality that you kind of get when you play receiver and you're getting no action. You kind of get cold. And Tom Brady talks about this really often when he broadcasts and commentates a lot of these NFL games. He always says, hey, you want to get your star receivers involved in the game early so they don't tap out on you late. You want to keep them involved. And he used to always say, like, he always used to want to find a way to get Randy Moss involved, rather if it be a 5-yard slant, a 3-yard drag, just get the brother into the game. Make him feel like he's a part of the game plan, because when you get a guy like A.J. Brown that's not getting a lot of action and you're just running the football, and then when you do choose to pass it and you do go his way and he has like a weird drop, you can't really be shocked because you weren't giving the guy any targets at all to begin with. So, of course, he's going to be a little bit cold. You want to keep your receivers in the game. Do receivers have a little bit of an attitude issue? Of course, but they're just passionate about the game. At a high school level, a lot of these new generational players that are coming into the league, it all starts at high school. These guys have an attitude where they want their hands on the football. They want to be able to control the outcome of the game. So therefore, you kind of have to somewhat appease them. You can't be paying these guys all this money talking about how great they are, but then come Sundays, you only want to give them 3-4 targets a game. You have to prioritize involving your star receivers in today's game of football with these new generational players that are entering this league, because when you don't get them involved, they tap out of the game, they lose a little bit of their edge, and you don't want that to happen. And that kind of just happens when, you don't really get much work. You kind of zone out of the game. You can say, well, JT, these guys are getting paid millions. They need to be giving it their all. Like, it's easy for you to say that. But when you're in the game and you're doing all this running just to get no action, imagine running a 30-yard post, then you got to run a 15-yard out or a 10-yard in, and you're doing this repeatedly over and over again for about 30, 40 plays. You're getting tired as hell, and you get no work until late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter. Of course, you're going to be a little bit zoned out, because it's kind of like, what the hell am I doing all this for if nobody's going to throw me the football? Would you not get frustrated if you're out there just running routes just to run routes? I would. So it's understandable why these wide receivers are divas. And from, off the field standpoint, I don't really think it's more so a personality thing with all these receivers kind of being soft or being like little girls. I just think the NFL is full of a bunch of guys with egos. You have everybody that's cut from a different walk of life. Everybody has different personalities. Everybody has different attitudes, and everybody ain't for everybody. Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, they may not be beefing because they did come out and kind of clarify those comments, but it doesn't seem like they're buddy-buddy, but that's okay. You don't need to be best friends with everybody on your team. Everybody's getting paid to do a job. At the end of the day, as simple as the sport is, what these guys play, it still is a job. And you don't have to like everybody that you work with to be successful. You just have to be able to get along with your coworkers. And as long as A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts are able to coexist, they're not at each other's necks, they're not beefing with each other, they're not getting into fights, who really cares if they're not best friends or whatnot? As long as they're going out there and winning games, that's the only thing that should matter. Shout out to my guy, Lateef Cooks. He says, get ready to see North Carolina get back to winning like they used to in the 90s. My guy, Hurricane Mike, says they're 11-2. I think they're 10-2. They might be 11-2. I think they are 10-2. But, yeah, it looks like they might have the same issues that happened last year. But I think they'll end up getting it figured out. They got a better group of coaches than what they had last year as their coordinators, and it looks like they kind of have gotten ahead of the issue. Now, in the world not too long ago, there was a time when C.J. Stroud was considered to be a top 5, top 7 quarterback in the National Football League, and Bryce Young looked like the biggest bust in the history of the NFL, worse than Jamarcus Russell. Now, fast forward to now, in both of these quarterbacks' last 5 games, Bryce Young has 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and has only been sacked 7 times, while on the other hand, C.J. Stroud has thrown 4 touchdowns to a whopping 5 interceptions, and he's been sacked an abysmal 19 times. The tables have tremendously turned for both Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud in terms of the trajectory of their career, because C.J. Stroud, he ascended so fast to the point where the expectations kind of exceeded how good the actual player was. CJ Stroud, to me right now, he still looks like a top 10, top 12 quarterback, but obviously he isn't as good as what the Josh Allens, the Mahomes, the Lamars, and the Joe Burrows are. And Bryce Young, his career has done a complete 360. I went from watching him play his first 2 games this season, not being able to get the Panthers offense past the 50, to all of a sudden being able to go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, giving the Philadelphia Eagles all they can handle. And over the last month, Bryce Young has just straight up outplayed CJ Stroud. And it goes to show you that it's not always about how you start, but it's about how you finish. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of wrote off Bryce Young a little bit too early. I thought that once he got benched in favor of Andy Dalton, it was wraps for him. And I was somebody that was a huge fan of Bryce Young, but I will admit, with how well he has played, not only has he deserved a third year to prove himself, but the more and more you watch him, the more swagger he seems to gain by every single game. The more he tends to improve from a confidence standpoint, because his first 2 games this season, he was scared to throw the football more than 10, 15 yards downfield. Now he's throwing passes in the tight windows. He's throwing guys open. We see the Bryce Young that we expected when the Panthers traded up the farm to draft him first overall in 2023. Meanwhile, for CJ Stroud, he has just been in a complete slump. Now, it's not all his fault, because he did lose Stephon Diggs out with a season-ending injury. He was without Nico Collins for a good part of this season, and his offensive line has been in shambles. The offensive guard play has been awful, and the dude's getting thrown around like a whack-a-mole out there. You get a sack, you get a sack, you get a sack. Anytime you go up against a CJ Stroud, or anytime you go up against CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans, if you're a defensive lineman or edge rusher, you're looking at him as dog food. When you play the Houston Texans, you're excited if you're somebody who specializes in rushing the quarterback, because you know that it's a good opportunity to get your sack numbers up with how piss poor their offensive line play has been this year. Not only has the offensive line play been bad, but their offensive coordinator has severely gotten worse. You know, at one point, Bobby Slowick was a candidate for a lot of head coaching jobs around this time last year. Now, although he didn't get any of them, he was a hot candidate to end up landing a head coaching gig at the end of this season. But with how disappointing the Texans have been offensively this year, and with the sophomore slump that Stroud is in, not only is Bobby Slowick not going to get a head coaching job, but I don't know if D'Amico Ryans is going to end up bringing him back for another season. When your quarterback enters their second season, that's the most pivotal season of their young career, because that's when you normally see them take a tremendous jump in improvement. Look at Trevor Lawrence. Look at the leap that he made from year 1 and year 2. The reasoning why he got that massive contract, why he's tied for being the highest paid quarterback in the NFL with Jordan Love, Jared Goff, and Joe Burrow, is based off how good he was his second season. Look at Bryce Young. Year 1 wasn't that good. Year 2, outside of his first 2 games, the brother has been flat out outstanding. The second season is the most pivotal to figuring out what you have at quarterback. It kind of is the defining season when it comes to evaluating if you have a guy that is good enough to lead you to a Super Bowl. And right now with CJ Stroud, we know that he is a solid quarterback, but we don't know if he ever is going to be as good as what a Lamar, Mahomes, or Josh Allen is. For all we know, he could more so trend around that Kirk Cousins territory for the rest of his career than he could be an elite quarterback. Now, CJ Stroud has had moments when he has shown that he still can play at a high level. He can be one of the better quarterbacks in the league, but it hasn't really been that often. And the next 3 games that the Texans have coming up, going up against the Dolphins, the Chiefs, and the Ravens, is not only going to define CJ Stroud, but it's also going to define the entirety of the Houston Texans and what they could do in the playoffs potentially. Because if they drop 2 out of their last 4, and let's say the Colts end up winning out, they could get the division took from right underneath them. It's really funny how the tables have turned between these two quarterbacks, because Panthers fans during the offseason, the reasoning for why there was such a divisive split between Panthers Nation due to the conversation about Bryce Young, is he good? Can he play? Should they give up on him? It's because of how good CJ Stroud was his rookie season. That kind of made Panthers fans kind of be like, you know what? We need to just go in a different direction, because if CJ Stroud is balling out like this, why is it Bryce Young? And remember, at the time when both of these guys got drafted last year, it was far believed that Bryce Young was in a better situation of the two. So for CJ to be so good right out the gate, it kind of gave people a little bit of some unrealistic expectation in terms of Bryce Young and how good he actually could be, because everybody was thinking that if you're not good right away, you can never be good. But he slowly has improved throughout the year. Meanwhile, CJ Stroud, I'm not saying he's gotten worse, but you definitely have concerns about, if this is going to be a guy that can ever reach elite quarterback status again. And these next 3 games are going to greatly define CJ Stroud as a quarterback and where he ranks among the rest of the QBs in the league. Because right now, based off how he's looked this year, he's played at a top 12, a top 15 level, which is a far cry from how good he looked last year. He looked like a top 5 quarterback. And if you were to ask me right now, who would I rather have, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, I'll be lying to you if I wouldn't tell you that I'd rather have Bryce Young. He has just looked more confident. Meanwhile, CJ Stroud, you just don't see the same level of confidence in him throwing the football like you did last year. You see a guy that looks like he's second-guessing himself. He kind of is thinking too much out there. The game just doesn't seem like it's coming naturally to CJ Stroud anymore. He's turning the football over at a high rate. CJ Stroud last season went about the first half of the year before he threw an interception. And now this season, he's making mistakes that you never saw him make during year one. It's funny how the tables turn. But that's just the NFL. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to my guy, some random sports dude. He drops 300 emojis. What's going on, my guy? What's going on, M Sparks? He says, sup, JT, Pittsburgh Steelers for life. Let's continue on. I know a lot of you Falcons fans are about to get extremely upset with what I'm about to say, but let's be honest. The expectations coming into this year was to win the NFC South and make it to the playoffs. The Atlanta Falcons were a heavy favorite to win this division. And for you to go from being 6-3, the front runner to win this division, possibly being able to win a playoff game, to all of a sudden a month later going on a 4-game losing streak, it raises a lot of questions and concerns about Raheem Morris. Is this dude actually a good head coach? Can he actually get the Falcons to the promised land? Because with his refusal to bench Kirk Cousins, who during this 4-game losing streak has thrown 8 interceptions and 0 touchdowns, it just gives me a lot of skepticism about him, because he already failed the first go around. He was the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And also you have a guy who was supposed to be a defensive-minded head coach, but yet the worst part of Atlanta's team is their defense. Their pass defense has been giving up big plays in the passing game all year long. Jordan Addison, Jay Jettas, they torched you last week. Sam Darnold, he went off against you. And going into these last couple of games, if the Falcons can't turn their season around and they miss out on the postseason, whether they play Michael Penix or not, I believe firing Raheem Morris is something that has to be on the table, because this was not supposed to be a year where the Falcons were supposed to rebuild. They already did all the rebuilding the previous 3 years that Arthur Smith was the head coach. And you fire Arthur Smith because you believe that you had a team that was good enough to win right now. You don't trade for Matt Judon before the season. You don't go ahead and sign a guy like a Justin Simmons if the belief is that you weren't going to be able to win this division. This was probably the weakest division in the NFL coming into this season, and it still is. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that you swept twice, has regained control of first place. And around this time of the season, we start to see teams separate themselves, and the Atlanta Falcons are starting to separate themselves in the worst way because they look like one of the biggest frauds of this year. Outside of when the Saints started out 2-0 and they were blowing out everybody, you're just along with them. You're in that fraud department as well. Raheem Morris is one of those coaches that when you listen to him talk on the podium, everything he says sounds like gold. He's a guy that can get you motivated, that can get you to believe in the vision. He can get you to believe that the Falcons are going in the right direction. But when you see the product on the field, it's just a completely different story. Jimmy Lake, he has to go. Kirk Cousins, he has to get benched. And yet Raheem Morris has made no adjustments. We keep seeing the same thing transpire with the Falcons week after week as they continue to rack up these losses. And there's not a single game that the Falcons have on their schedule right now that you can say they're guaranteed to win. When you lose to the New Orleans Saints, which at that time, that was the first game that they had their new interim head coach, it's problematic. When you have a quarterback that's just out there, that's a veteran, that has been in this league for a while, that you pay so much money to, he's playing bad, and you just continue to enable him to go out and cost you games, it's on the coaching. I don't see any adjustments. The defense still looks bad week after week. Kirk Cousins is racking up the interceptions. He's thrown more interceptions to the opposing team than he's thrown touchdowns to his teammates. The Falcons have a talented enough team where making the playoffs is something that definitely was realistic. And not making it to the playoffs is a fireable offense. That's what the expectations were coming into this year. And the Falcons are looking like they're going to be on the outside looking in because it doesn't look like things are going to get any better. Michael Penix, what was the point of drafting one of the older quarterback prospects that high when you had other positions of need, when you already gave so much money to Kirk Cousins? Now it kind of looks like they made that decision to draft Michael Penix because they had some doubts about Kirk Cousins not being the same player that he once was prior to that Achilles injury last season in Minnesota. And now it looks like their worst fears have come true. And it looks like Raheem Morris and that front office are hesitant to move on from Kirk Cousins because they don't want to show that giving him all that money was a bad decision. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have one of the highest paid backups in the league get to the playoffs than continue to just roll a guy out there just for politics, because that's what Raheem Morris is doing right now. He's politicking. Michael Penix can't be any worse than what Kirk Cousins is right now. And if you're going to tolerate turnovers, you rather tolerate them from your rookie quarterback compared to a guy who's been playing in the NFL for about a decade long now. Turnovers are unacceptable for a guy that has had as much experience as what Kirk Cousins has. That's why when the Indianapolis Colts went back from Joe Flacco to Anthony Richardson, it made a lot of sense because Joe Flacco was not playing efficient football. If you're going to deal with turnovers, you rather have them from your younger player than to have them from a vet. You can understand having a young quarterback throwing a bunch of interceptions because that's what young quarterbacks do. But for a guy like Kirk Cousins that has played so much football to play this bad, it's inexcusable for him to still be starting. And that is a sign that Raheem Morris is not that good of a coach. At this point, I wouldn't put it off the table of the Atlanta Falcons moving on from this dude. I think that they could do much better getting a guy like Ben Johnson. Hell, you should have hired Bill Belichick, but Falcons fans have too much pride to admit that they made a mistake hiring Raheem Morris instead of Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick would have had that defense right. Everywhere Bill Belichick has gone, he's always had elite defense. Look how far off the Patriots defense has dropped off ever since they got rid of Bill Belichick. And Gerard Mayo is a former player. He played on defense. You know, he's a defensive-minded coach. And that defense, every single week, he's criticizing it, saying it's soft, they can't stop the run. Well, they had one of the best run defenses in the NFL last year. And now Bill Belichick, the job he's done being the offensive coordinator for the Steelers, it looks like he's going to get another opportunity within the next year or so to get another crack at being a head coach again. And I believe that Arthur Smith should have been given one more year. If you were going to have a season like this occur, you rather do it with Arthur Smith, because he could get much more out of a guy like Kirk Cousins, much more out of this offense than what Raheem Morris had. And plus, the defensive coordinator that they had last year, Ryan Nielsen, he did a pretty good job with this Falcons defense, in spite of all of the turnovers that Desmond Ridder had. Desmond Ridder was a turnover machine, and you just have a higher turnover machine now that's just more highly compensated than what Desmond Ridder is. And at this point, Kirk Cousins, you could say he's been worse than Desmond Ridder. If the Falcons miss the playoffs, I feel Raheem Morris should be fired, because the expectations coming into this year was for this to be a team that not only took advantage of a weak division, but also could not just make it to the playoffs, but also win a playoff game or two. And it would just be a giant disappointment if this season just continues to spiral the way it has these last 4 weeks for Atlanta, and they just completely fall flat on their face, and they end up having another 7-10 or an 8-9 season. You know, it just would be severely disappointing considering the hype that they had coming into this year and when they started out 6-3. My guy, Son Random Sports Dude, says it might be above Morris' head. Pause. Arthur Blank could be making the calls on Kirk Cousins. That could be. My guy, N Sparks, also says Dirty Birdie's got a bad organization. My guy, N Sparks, also says Belichick, not sure how he would do in the NCAA. That would be interesting. I think he'll do a pretty good job. Every time I watch Hard Knocks, I see a clear difference between the Steelers and the Ravens. There's a reason why the Steelers have overachieved and why the Ravens have underachieved this year. And it's pretty obvious why this is. You look at the Ravens, every time they interview John Harbaugh, anytime they talk to any other coaches, it's always about Lamar Jackson. Lamar is so great. Aid is so great. But when you hear them interview Mike Tomlin on Hard Knocks, it's about how good the team is, how he's trying to get the most out of everybody. It's not just him locking in on Russell Wilson. It's getting the most out of a younger player, Nate Herberg. It's getting the most out of a aging veteran, and Cam Hayward. You know, it's trying to get the most out of everybody on the team. When you listen to Mike Tomlin on Hard Knocks and you watch the Steelers play, you see a team. When you look at the Ravens, it's Lamar Jackson. And the Ravens, their issue is that they're too codependent on Lamar Jackson to mask all of their weaknesses. Lamar Jackson has to go out there every single week and play flawless football. The only reason that John Harbaugh still has a job is because of Lamar Jackson. So you got the Ravens, who came into this year with all this Super Bowl hype. Everybody was saying if there ever was going to be a year for the Ravens to get over the hump, it was this season. And yet they find themselves in second place behind the team that the expectations were not really that high. Me and a bunch of folks were not expecting Russell Wilson to be as good as what he's been. But Mike Tomlin, there hasn't been a single head coach in the National Football League that has done more with less than what he has. If Mike Tomlin had a quarterback as good as what Lamar Jackson is, the Steelers probably would have already had a Super Bowl win by now. You know, Mike Tomlin knows how to get the most out of his players. The Ravens, on the other hand, you know, not only do they do a poor job of maximizing their personnel in big games, why is it that when they're playing the Philadelphia Eagles, they're just weirdly taking out Derrick Henry and forcing in Justice Hill? Derrick Henry is the second best player in your offense. He's an MVP candidate too. He should never be coming off the field as often as what he does. You know, Todd Monken in big games, his play calling kind of goes down the drain. You see why the Baltimore Ravens lost the way they did in the AFC Championship game last year. Because this isn't a football team. This is Lamar Jackson. Go out there and save us. Go out there and compensate for a defense that's not that good. Yeah, the Ravens defense has kind of improved over these last couple of weeks. But anytime they play up against a remotely competent passing attack, they always get shredded. The Ravens were supposed to be a sure lock to win the AFC North. And yet at this point, there's a chance that not only are they not going to have a chance at winning this division, but they could end up having to go on the road in the playoffs, and maybe they end up being an early playoff exit because this isn't a well-coached football team. They're heavily penalized for a reason, and they beat themselves. Bill Belichick, on his podcast a few weeks ago, he said that the only team that can beat the Ravens are the Ravens. And that has held true when you watch Baltimore play. They just are a team that doesn't look buttoned up compared to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers' identity is not Russell Wilson. Their identity is that we are a team. We're going to win together. Our success isn't strictly tied to an individual. Last week, they beat the Browns without their best player, George Pickens, even playing in that game. If you were to take away Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson off the Ravens, they would not even be able to win more than 3 games. Mike Tomlin, meanwhile, has been winning with all kinds of random quarterbacks. A duck caller, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Two Small Hands Pickett. Mike Tomlin has consistently overachieved and done more with less because he's been a better overall head coach at getting the most out of his team compared to John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh has had the luxury of being able to ride the coattails of a 2-time, possibly 3-time MVP, a 2-time All-Pro, and the most talented quarterback that ever touched a football in Lamar Jackson. This segment isn't a dig at Lamar. It's a dig at the fact that the Ravens' problem is that they only rely on Lamar Jackson, and they can't really rely on any other part of their team to win football games. You have the greatest kicker of all time who's costing you games. You know, you have a defense that is giving up damn near a third-year game at one point. This is not a team that I can trust to see making a deep playoff run. If the Ravens were to play Kansas City, they would automatically get smacked because in late game situations, Andy Reid always outcoaches John Harbaugh. The Ravens just can't get out of their own way. Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they know who they are as a football team. Now that they finally have competent quarterback play, there's a great chance that the Steelers could end up matching up against Kansas City in the AFC Championship. It's not always the most talented team who wins it all. Sometimes it's about who can get hot at the right moment and who's the better coached team. And right now, the Steelers are a more complete team than what the Baltimore Ravens are. And that's why they currently find themselves in the driver's seat of the AFC North compared to the Baltimore Ravens. The Steelers are not going to lose out. If anything, the Steelers may lose a game or two, but they still are going to win this division. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up smacking Baltimore the next time they play coming up, because Baltimore just is not a team that is well coached enough to beat a team like the Chiefs, the Steelers, or even the Buffalo Bills if they have to play them in the postseason, because they are too Lamar Jackson dependent. All they talk about is Lamar Jackson is great. Lamar Jackson is this. Lamar Jackson is that. When do they ever talk about anybody else on the team? They talk about Derrick Henry occasionally, but that's about it. It's just Lamar Jackson is the prime focus of the Baltimore Ravens. When the New England Patriots were winning Super Bowls during the peak era of the Brady-Belichick dynasty, it wasn't all about Brady. Bill Belichick, what was he notoriously known for saying? Do your job. Everybody has to do their job, because when everybody does their job, we all win, because it's a team game. The Ravens, the way they make it seem like is if Lamar Jackson could play all 11 positions, they would be undefeated, and that could be true, but that's not a winning mentality to me. That's not a championship mentality to me. When the Chiefs win, it's not always because of Mahomes. It's because of everybody else stepping up and making the big plays when it matters the most. The Ravens have a Lamar Jackson codependency problem. They can't find ways to win outside of relying on him to just save the day every single game that they find themselves cornered in. And that's why they have underachieved this year and why the Steelers have overachieved. And when you watch Hard Knocks, it's really evident that Mike Tomlin is miles above the rest of the other coaches in the AFC North, and is not even close. Mike Tomlin knows how to motivate his players. He knows how to get them to step up in big moments. Look at Nate Herberg. When they played the Cincinnati Bengals all week leading up to that game, Mike Tomlin was telling them, hey, Nate, like, get ready for Orlando Brown. The reasoning for why they signed Orlando Brown is because we were terrorizing their right tackle, Jonah Williams. That's why they had to go out and get him. And what did Nate Herberg do? What did Nate Herberg do against the Bengals? And one of the biggest moments of the game, he beats Orlando Brown, just flat out beats him with speed, forces a fourth fumble, and he gets scooped up for a scoop and score by rookie linebacker Logan Wilson. That's the prime definition of what great coaching is, and you don't see that out of John Harbaugh. There are levels to this. There's a clear gap between John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin, and if Mike Tomlin had a transcendent quarterback as good as Lamar Jackson, he probably would have had another Super Bowl by now. The Ravens are not a better team than the Steelers, and that's why they find themselves shockingly in second place in this division. The Steelers are not going to fall off. Why? Because they're a real football team. They're well coached. They don't beat themselves. The Ravens do. I got a few more things I want to say before I get up on out of here, so don't go anywhere just yet. Smash that like button, subscribe, follow, hit that bell icon wherever you're watching, YouTube, X, Facebook. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcast from. Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The links are down in the description down below. Now, these next 3 games for the Houston Texans are going to make or break their season, because right now, the Indianapolis Colts are right on their trail. So if the Houston Texans end up losing 2 out of their last 4, there's a good chance that they possibly could end up finishing 8-9, 9-8, and the Colts end up sneaking up right behind them, and they take this division from underneath their throats. Because the Indianapolis Colts, although they have lost the season series to Houston, they got swept. They lost both times they played. If they can beat the Denver Broncos this upcoming weekend, they get back to 500. And if the Miami Dolphins, who are also competing for that final playoff spot, ends up beating Houston, Houston falls to 8-6, and the Colts are only 1 game shy of regaining control of the division. Because the Colts' last 4 games, the Broncos, if you beat them, your next 3 games are against teams that are tanking for draft positioning. That being the Titans, the Giants, and the Jaguars. So it's fair to see a world where the Indianapolis Colts win out. They finish 10-7. And with the Houston Texans having to play not just the Miami Dolphins, who are a playoff caliber football team, but going on the road, the Arrowhead. Then you got to play the Ravens. I could see the Houston Texans falling off the same way that we see the Atlanta Falcons going right now, with them on a current 4-game losing streak, because the Texans have not played good football. Their defense has played well, but offensively, they're in shambles. Their offensive line has played crappy. C.J. Stroud is in the midst of a sophomore slump. Their offensive coordinator is in the slump along with them. The Texans right now have a lot to prove these next 3 weeks, and I really see a world where they end up not making the playoffs and the Colts get hot at the right moment. Remember, in the NFL, it's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. Remember, the Atlanta Falcons a month ago were 6-3, and it looked like they were going to run away with the NFC South due to all of the injuries that the Buccaneers had. But with the Buccaneers getting healthy at the right time and getting hot late in the season and the Falcons going cold, they've been able to regain control of the NFC South. And I can see the same thing happening in the AFC South, because ever since the Indianapolis Colts went back to Anthony Richardson, he's looked way better. I don't know what's been going on with these second-year quarterbacks, but apparently when you bench them, all of a sudden they become better quarterbacks because Anthony Richardson, although he still has had erratic accuracy, he's been way better throwing the football than what he was prior to his benching. So if they can beat Denver, they're right back in it because their next games, I expect them to win. And there's a lot of people with me that feel that the Colts are going to steal this division from the Houston Texans. Look, coming into this year, I believe that the Texans were going to be a dark horse Super Bowl contender. I don't see that anymore. You have to accept the team for what they are now and not what you thought they were going to be. You can't hold on to a prediction where you have a team that obviously isn't playing at the level expected. The Texans are a far cry from the team that we thought we were going to see this year. C.J. Stroud, I was expecting him to play MVP level football this season. We haven't seen that. And it's not all his fault. The injuries at wide receiver, Nico Collins missed a pretty big stretch. Stephon Diggs is out for the year. But when your defense forces 5 interceptions against the Detroit Lions and you still can't win, it's an indictment on you as a football team because even when the Lions were playing their worst football, you couldn't capitalize off those mistakes. The Texans look like a above, barely average football team right now. And with how the AFC is going, if you can't get the 10 wins, you're going to be on the outside looking into the playoff picture. And right now, these last 4 games are really pivotal for the Houston Texans if they want to hold on to the AFC South. Because I'm trying to tell you guys, the Indianapolis Colts, they're coming. They're getting hot at the right moment. You know, Anthony Richardson has played really well. And with the style of football that Indianapolis likes to play, more relying on running the football with AR and Jonathan Taylor, it's perfect for this time of the season when it's cold. You can't really throw the football like that anyway because of the weather. Being able to run the football is so important, and the Indianapolis Colts can do it really well with their personnel. Meanwhile, for the Houston Texans, you can't even protect your franchise quarterback. You can't even keep him upright. You're going to struggle against the Dolphins, the Chiefs, and the Ravens. You want to know why? Because all 3 of those teams have a fantastic pass rush. And if you can't win on the line of scrimmage, you already lost. The majority of your wins this year have not come against great teams. Yeah, you were good early during the season, but you're not the same team now as what you were early during those wins. You know, I expect the Indianapolis Colts to take that playoff spot away from the Houston Texans. I expect them to win their last 4, steal the AFC South championship from Houston, and they get that home field playoff game in the wild card round. And the Houston Texans, they could be finding themselves barely missing the playoffs at 8-9, maybe 9-8 with the way their season has gone. You couldn't have played any worser going into the most crucial stretch of your season if you are the Houston Texans. Right now, the stars are perfectly aligned for the Indianapolis Colts to take this division away. You can call me a hater, but I'm not being a hater. I think you have to be really naive if you're a Texans fan to be able to watch how this team has played over the last 5 games and say with a straight face that you still believe that this team can not only win this division, but can make a deep playoff run, because you're far from that. You're not as good as what the Chiefs are. You're not as good as what the Baltimore Ravens are. And with the offensive line issues that you've had this year, there's no chance in hell you're going to have a shot at being able to beat any of those teams, especially if you got to play Kansas City and Arrowhead. You can't expect to beat Kansas City in that cold weather environment by trying to sling the football all over the field. You got to be able to run it. And Joe Mixon, he's been really good, but it's more so been due to his ability to make guys miss and to get a lot of yards after contact compared to the offensive line opening up running lanes for him. Imagine if Joe Mixon was playing behind the offensive line that was just as good as the one that Saquon Barkley has in Philadelphia. He would be in an MVP discussion as well, and he's been the focal point of the Houston Texans offense. And there's nothing wrong with a running back being the best player on your offense, but for the hype that C.J. Stroud had coming in, man, things do not look good for Houston. And for Indianapolis, you have a great opportunity to take advantage of the Houston Texans' impending demise which looks like it's coming very, very quickly. We're going to see how the Texans look coming off this bye week, but I'm very confident that the Colts are going to get that last playoff spot because they're going to end up winning this division over a Texas team that right now they're spiraling left at the wrong time. My guy N Spark says Baldwin, since he got no defense, Texans O-line sucks. He says 100 JT, Texans underwhelming. Yeah, man. Absolutely, bro. They're not looking good. The Las Vegas Raiders hired the wrong interim head coach. They hired Antonio Pierce when Max Crosby and a lot of the players campaigned for him, but yet they didn't hire the interim head coach who led them to their most successful season in over 10 years. Who's the guy I'm talking about? I'm talking about Rich Bisaccia or Rich Bisaccia. Is it Rich Bisaccia? Yeah, it's Rich Bisaccia. Start run that back. The Las Vegas Raiders hired the wrong interim head coach. Antonio Pierce, he got a lot of praise from guys like Max Crosby and a bunch of other players in that Raiders locker room last year. There was a lot of belief that he could be the guy to lead the Raiders to success, only for them to fall flat on their face and be worse than what they were last year. And I believe that the Raiders, their mistake wasn't hiring Antonio Pierce. It wasn't hiring Josh McDaniels, but it was them refusing to hire the interim head coach who led this franchise to more success than what they've had in the last decade, that being interim head coach Rich Bisaccia. In 2021, remember when John Gruden stepped down due to those leaked emails that came out? He ended up taking over the mantle as head coach and being able to turn around this team season in spite of all of the internal turmoil that they had going on. Because remember, not only did John Gruden step down because of those leaked emails, but you also had the incident with Henry Ruggs. And in spite of all that, the Raiders went 10-7, and they gave the Cincinnati Bengals, who went to the Super Bowl that year, a really close game in the wild card round. They were a goal line stand away from sending that game into overtime. Possibly they could have won it if they would have gotten the touchdown and they went for two. Who would have known what could have happened? But for Rich Bisaccia to be able to have that much success in that short of a span, and yet you end up not hiring him, and instead you go with Josh McDaniels and bootleg Mike Tomlin, it's an indictment of how poorly run of a franchise the Las Vegas Raiders are. You might not have been wanting to keep Mike Mayock and the current regime in the front office, but with Rich Bisaccia being able to deliver what your last two head coaches have been unable to, it kind of shows that, this was something special about this guy. And although he has been a special teams coach for the Packers for the last couple of years ever since, it still doesn't show, that he's not capable as a head coach, because if he can turn that season around with everything that he had to go through, leaked emails from John Gruden, Henry Ruggs costing somebody their life, getting sent to prison pretty much, he could have still been able to have more success than what Antonio Pierce and Josh McDaniels have. You cannot take away the success that Rich Bisaccia had as the interim head coach for the Raiders. In just such a short amount of time, he was able to do what your last two hires have been unable to do. Antonio Pierce, it looks like he's going to go on his way to becoming a one and done as a head coach. The only good thing Antonio Pierce has done for the Las Vegas Raiders is put them in position to draft either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders with the first overall pick in next year's draft. Now, the reasoning for why the 2024 season this year for the Raiders has gone left isn't solely because of Antonio Pierce being incompetent as a head coach, but you've dealt with a lot of injuries. Christian Wilkins has been out. Aiden O'Connell got injured. Gardner Minshew has been banged up. You've had a lot of injuries that you had to deal with. But with Antonio Pierce being able to overachieve with everything that went on last season, going 8-9, you would have thought that this Raiders team would have been much better than what they've been this year. And I don't really see injuries being the big excuse that can be used to justify keeping Antonio Pierce around when there's been a good amount of games that the Raiders have lost that have come down to the last possession. When you either have a missed field goal, a botched snap, like that loss against Kansas City, I felt he should have gotten fired then. You've cleaned house with the entire coaching staff on the offense. You fired the offensive line coach. You fired the offensive coordinator, and yet you're still getting the same results. Rich Bisaccia, on the other hand, when he was the interim head coach, he took what should have been a disastrous season and turned around and was still able to give you a little bit of optimism going into the following season. I felt that them not hiring Rich Bisaccia, not making him the full-time head coach, was one of the biggest mistakes that this franchise has made over the last 20 years outside of their bad draft picks. You know, the guys on that staff with Rich Bisaccia, which they most likely were going to run it back with, were the ones who drafted Damien Arnett, Alex Leatherwood in the first round. But to me, the personnel decisions didn't really matter. Because if you are winning football games, then it doesn't really matter how many personnel decisions you whiffed on because you're still a winning football team. And Mike Mayock wanted to run it back with Rich Bisaccia. You know, I figured, hey, if you can make it to the playoffs with him being your head coach and you being the GM, why couldn't you do it the following year? And yeah, they did get blown out twice by Kansas City that season. But the big picture is they went 10-7 and they made the playoff. They had more success with Rich Bisaccia than what they had with McDaniels and Antonio Pierce. Hell, even John Gruden, even when John Gruden, before he had to step down, the Raiders still weren't doing all that good. So you had more success than your last three coaches in a short amount of time. I felt Rich Bisaccia should have gotten his head coaching job, and I don't really see the argument that you could have made against him not getting an opportunity. And if you fire Antonio Pierce, you're not going to be able to get a Ben Johnson. You're not going to be able to get any of the big-name head coaches out there. You might as well go back and bring back Rich Bisaccia because he has some unfinished business to attend to. He led you to a 10-7 season for what should have been a year that you were tanking for another draft pick. Because after Henry Ruggs had that ugly incident and he ended up getting put behind bars, I thought it was rots for the Raiders. I thought that, they just were dejected with everything that went on, but he was able to rally the troops. You had an infectious environment of a team that may not have been that talented, but overachieved because you had an interim head coach that was able to take over and inject some life into this team at the right moment, and he was able to turn around what should have been a crappy season. I still, for the life of me, cannot understand why Rich Bisaccia was never given another year to be the full-time head coach of this team. You would have thought he would have earned that with him being able to take this team to the postseason. But meanwhile, Antonio Pierce gets another opportunity despite going 8-9. His best win was getting a Christmas miracle against the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas and doing the Chargers a favor and blowing them out on Thursday Night Football and helping them take out the trash, which was Brandon Staley. Other than that, there's been nothing that Antonio Pierce has done that you can hang your hat on and say he deserves another year. You're going to give AP another season before you would have given Rich Bisaccia another year after he led you to the playoffs? Come on now. Make this make sense to me. Somebody in the comment section, if you are a diehard Raiders fan, please tell me why Rich Bisaccia was not given the full-time head coaching job. I really want to know because I was doing a lot of research on this all throughout the day, and I couldn't really find anything outside of maybe their owner didn't want to run it back with the guys in the front office, and that's cool, but you could have fired Mike Mayock. You could have fired those guys who made all of those awful draft picks and still could have kept Rich Bisaccia. He's one of those guys that just seems to get along with everybody in a sense. If you can turn around that bad of a situation and still make it to the playoffs, there's something special about you. It is. Just because he's a special teams coach doesn't mean that he's not head coach material. Just because he hasn't been given another head coaching interview or another head coaching opportunity still doesn't erase what he did for you that season. Your last two hires after that were whiffs. You might as well run it back Rich Bisaccia. If Mark Davis could have gone back and redid that decision. I'm pretty confident he would have given Rich Bisaccia another year. He just probably could have fired everybody in the front office. And maybe him making that error, not bringing back Rich Bisaccia, was a little bit of the reason why he brought back Antonio Pierce, because he didn't want to miss out on, making another bad decision by not keeping the interim head coach that the players and everybody else in the organization rallied behind. Now, the last thing I want to get into before I get up on out of here, Shedeur Sanders, to me, is a generational quarterback prospect. If you are the New York Giants or the Las Vegas Raiders, there's no way you can pass on drafting Shedeur Sanders with the first overall pick. Shedeur Sanders, to me, is chocolate-covered Joe Burrow. There's a lot of similarities in both Shedeur and Joe Burrow's game. They both are really prolific pocket passers. They got a really good feel for moving inside of the pocket, being able to evade pressure. They have really good accuracy. They throw with great anticipation. As soon as a wide receiver makes their break, boom, it's there. They don't have the strongest arms, but they have good enough arms that they can make every single throw. And plus, they throw the ball with great touch down the field. Shedeur Sanders is everything that you look for in the franchise quarterback. He has aura, he has moxie, he has charisma. Same thing with Joe Burrow when he was coming out of LSU. When you looked at Joe Burrow during his LSU career, especially during his final season, you just saw a dude that just oozed confidence. Joe Burrow had franchise quarterback written all over him, and the same thing can be said about Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is one of those quarterback prospects that when you draft him, the day he first walks into your facilities, he immediately changes the culture of your franchise. Look what he has done his last 2 seasons at Colorado. He has resurrected a relevant program. Colorado hasn't made this much noise since they had Eric Bieniemy running it up at running back. This past year, 35 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, completing 74.2% of his passes. That is one of the best statistical seasons that any quarterback has put up this year. Even last year, 27 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. That was the best touchdown to interception ratio in all of FBS. Not only is Shedeur Sanders really accurate, but he has a high football IQ. He understands coverages. That's why he throws the ball with so much anticipation. He's good at reading defenses. That's what you need if you want to be a successful quarterback at the next level. When I am evaluating quarterbacks, the 3 most important things that I look at is, are you good at diagnosing coverages? Are you good at throwing guys open? And are you good at winning from within the pocket? Do you go through your progressions? Do you go through your reads? Shedeur Sanders checks all 3-4 of those boxes. And Joe Burrow was a similar prospect to what Shedeur Sanders is coming out. They're not going to blow you away physically. They're not going to blow you away with their athleticism. But if you're looking for a guy who would come in day one and can produce at a top 15 level for you right out the gate, Shedeur Sanders is your guy. This is somebody that is already battle tested, that has already been put in the ringer, that's ready for the struggles that comes with being an NFL quarterback, getting drafted that high and not going into an ideal situation. He has played behind one of the worst offensive lines in college football for the last 2 seasons. He's no stranger to having to overcome bad offensive line play. If the Giants would have had Shedeur Sanders right now, they automatically would go from being one of the worst teams in the NFL to being an average team in the league. Because you give a guy like Shedeur Sanders, Malik Neighbors, Wandale Robinson, and Brian Dable cooking up the plays, that would be scary. Even the Las Vegas Raiders, you haven't had a quarterback with this much aura since you had Rich Gannon. That was like damn near 2 decades ago. The last time the Raiders had a competent quarterback that actually was franchise caliber, I was in the womb. Derek Carr was good, but he didn't scream franchise quarterback to me. He was a good quarterback, but not a franchise quarterback. Not somebody that could elevate a franchise. Not somebody that you look at and say, oh yeah, you're the one that can lead us to glory. When you look at Shedeur Sanders, you see that smile, you see them pearly white teeth. you see a franchise quarterback. I, for the life of me, do not understand the hate that Shedeur Sanders gets. That is just completely unwarranted. I mean, yeah, he's had a little bit of some back and forth with a few former players on Twitter, but that's just what young athletes do, man. Young athletes, when you come at them, they're going to respond. You mean to tell me that Shedeur doesn't have a right to respond? Come on now. Meanwhile, you have guys like Malik Neighbors and everybody else taking shots at their coaches, not getting enough touches. Like, Shedeur Sanders has never thrown any of his current teammates under the bus. You know, he takes care of his offensive linemen. He is the sole reason why a lot of these players like Travis Hunter, Jordan Seaton flock to Colorado, flock to Jackson State. If Shedeur wasn't at Jackson State, I don't know if Travis Hunter still plays for Deion Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is one of those players that people love to be around, contrary to popular belief. I got a homie that plays for Colorado. He said during the offseason, Shedeur flew the whole entire receiving room out to come train with him in Houston. You know, there is a player that I went to FAU with that transferred to Colorado because of Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is a guy that everybody in the media loves to hate, but a lot of the players love to play with. You can get mad at the cockiness all you want to, but look who his dad is. And that's another thing. With Shedeur Sanders understanding the expectations that comes with the last name on his jersey, he understands the work that he needs to put in, the commitment, the excellence that he needs to have. The Raiders, on the front of their stadium, have a poster, or they used to have a poster that used to say, committed to excellence. It hasn't looked like they've been committed to excellence over these last couple of years, or probably the last 2 decades, but Shedeur Sanders is the meaning of that. Because you have somebody that has been mentored by Tom Brady. You have somebody that has been vouched for by Tom Brady. And with Tom Brady being a minority owner in the Raiders, I could see him whispering in Mark Davis' ears, hey, you got to draft that Shedeur Sanders kid. He's got it. You know, I really don't see and understand the hate for Shedeur Sanders. I saw my guy Brett Coleman. I love you, Brett Coleman, but drafting Drew Aller over Shedeur Sanders is borderline outrageous when Shedeur Sanders has done more with less compared to Drew Aller. Drew Aller is too inconsistent. He's too erratic. Shedeur Sanders is a better quarterback prospect in terms of if he can be able to produce at a solid level for you day one out the gate. He's that guy. Drew Aller is a guy who has to sit for a year or two before you can be trusted enough to give him the reins to an offense. Shedeur, to me, is Joe Burrow, but he's just covered in chocolate. That's why, to me, Shedeur Sanders is a can't-miss quarterback prospect. This is one of the best quarterback prospects that I've seen come out of college football in recent memory. Is he as good as Andrew Luck and Caleb Williams? No, but he's definitely up there. If he would have declared for last year's draft, I would have drafted him over Drake May, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. He could have been QB3. And Drake May has been really good, but Shedeur Sanders is just on a different level when it comes to his ability to read the field, process defenses, go through his progressions. Shedeur Sanders is the full package. This is everything that you want in the franchise quarterback. If you want somebody that's going to bring energy and optimism back to your fan base, Shedeur Sanders is your guy. If you want somebody that's going to change your franchise from being a consistent loser and a consistent bottom dweller in the National Football League, Shedeur is the guy to do that. Just like how Joe Burrow was for the Cincinnati Bengals, when nobody thought they could ever get back to the Super Bowl, he did it in year 2. Shedeur Sanders is that kind of player. When I look at him, I see the black version of Joe Burrow. This is it for this episode of JT Sports Live. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Shout out to my guy M Sparks. He says the Raiders got a tank to get him. Giants might not win another game. He says, yeah, Giants will be a better situation for Lil Prime, better than the Raiders currently. Yeah, I got a really good feeling about Shedeur Sanders, man. I love me some Shedeur Sanders. It's perfect timing for him to be the first overall pick, in my opinion. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in for this episode. Make sure that you guys smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon if you're new so you don't miss when we drop new content and when we go live. Give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast from.